What are some serial killer facts about serial killers that you find extremely interesting? 1. Jeffrey Dahmer, towards the end right before he got caught, had so many bodies in his apartment that he ran out of room and stored one victim in his bathtub. He proceeded to shower over him every day for a month. Think about that, straddling over a rotten corpse to get fresh and clean for the day. Unreal. 2. The serial killer Bela Kiss liked to pickle people in barrels stored in his basement. Someone figured it out, but they couldn't get him because he was fighting in World War I. By the time they tracked him down, he had disappeared and left a dead guy in his hospital bed. He supposedly joined the French Foreign Legion and deserted that too, and I think history loses track of him after that, with the exception of one possible sighting as a janitor in New York. The janitor disappeared before anyone could confirm it. 3. I have a family member who briefly dated this guy. She almost but not quite fit the profile of his victims. One time when he picked her up, her adult son was visiting the house, met him, and shook his hand. He ghosted her after that. Also, my mom was living in a mobile home park in Wichita during BTK's killing spree. My dad was deployed overseas. They had a big German shepherd who she would put outside for a little bit every night before going to sleep, and she said for a while she had to bring him in early because he would just go crazy barking, growling and snarling every night. Shortly after he stopped doing that, there was a BTK murder not too far from the mobile home park. Scary stuff. Some older homes in Wichita have a second landline installed by the door because he was notorious for cutting phone lines. People would come home and check the line by the door, then the other line, just to reassure themselves. 4. Dorangel Vargas killed and ate at least 10 people. He only ate men because he said their meat tasted better than women's. He also wouldn't eat fat people because he thought they contained too much cholesterol. Journalist Vlado Tennessee was caught when he reported on his own crimes and included information that hadn't been released to the public and only the killer could know. Edit. More info on Tennessee. Of the 4 women who disappeared, 3 were found displayed signs of being viciously raped, molested and tortured before being strangled to death with a phone cord. Though the police had initially revealed that the women had been strangled, they had not said with what. Noticing that Tennessee had correctly named the specific type of phone cord used, they arrested him on suspicion of murder. After questioning him, they obtained a search warrant for his home. His house was filled with pornography and notes about the crimes. He had been carrying out the murders, then writing about them in great detail for the paper, as if taunting the police. 5. Dean Corll, also known as the Candyman, was a serial killer who had 2 teenage accomplices. He repeatedly paid them to lure other teenage boys to his house for him to kill. The really fascinating part is how it all ended up going down. Pretty much, his one accomplice, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., was out looking for victims one night when instead he ran into a female friend whose father had been abusing her. Henley ended up taking her and a male friend to Corll's home in order to escape the abuse. As expected, Corll wasn't too excited about a girl being brought because he usually exclusively killed boys. So Henley and his 2 friends wake up tied up. Corll says that he's going to kill them all, but Henley manages to talk his way into getting untied so he can help Corll kill the others instead. Before anything happens though, Henley grabs Corll's gun and pretty much refuses to harm the girl, saying that Corll's gone too far this time. Corll starts goading Henley, saying that he won't shoot him. Henley does in fact shoot him. He ends up untying the 2 other teens, who end up telling Henley to call the police. During the call, Henley admits to shooting Corll, and he goes on to confess to everything when the investigation into Corll and the shooting begins. Probably the craziest part of this story is what Henley said to his male friend while waiting for the police to show. "If you weren't my friend, I could have gotten $200 for you." 6. I absolutely love reading about serial killers, so I've got a fair bit. The best, in my opinion, are the Axeman of New Orleans. Insisted he would kill anybody he found not listening to jazz on one specific night, and it actually stopped him for a while. Most serial killers take longer to catch because most of the time they have no connection to their victims. There's a precedent for Jack the Ripper being a midwife. She would have been able to get close to prostitutes without anyone getting suspicious. Nobody would suspect a woman when they were looking for a man. She would have had basic anatomical knowledge required and the blood would be dismissed as a failed pregnancy. 7. Lawrence Bittaker of the Toolbox Killers made an audio recording of them torturing and raping their last victim. It was recovered by authorities before he could destroy it. During his trial they played the recording for the court. Reporters were waiting outside since they weren't allowed in, but there's video on YouTube of the door of the courtroom bursting open and someone from inside running out and throwing up, supposedly because what he was hearing was so disgusting. In the footage, you can briefly hear the horrific screaming from the recording for the brief period the door is open. Bittaker was said to be smiling the entire time the recording played. The recording is still in the possession of the FBI and as of a few years ago is used to help desensitize agents to the reality of these types of crimes. Also, one of the detectives that made the arrest committed suicide years later, and in his suicide note, he expressed concern for the possibility of Bittaker ever getting out of prison. I commented this on another post, but Bittaker receives fan mail in prison, To which he replies and signs the letter, pliers, one of his main tools for torturing his victims. 8. When my dad committed suicide in the 90s, the police tried to pin some serial killer thing on him. Apparently prior to his death there had been someone killing people up and down the UK and sending taunting letters about the murders to the police. The letters were typed on an antique Olivetti typewriter. The fact he was a lorry driver and we had an antique, not Olivetti typewriter at home was enough for them to say it was him. I was quite young and don't really know the whole story, but I think they decided it wasn't him in the end. What really puzzles me is no matter how much I search, I can't find a single piece of info online about this killer who was typing notes to the police. It could be an ongoing investigation and this serial killer could still be killing people in the UK. 9. Joseph James D'Angelo would tie up the husband in another room to listen to the wife being raped. He stacked dishes up on the husband, telling him if he heard a rattle, let alone a crash, he'd kill both of them. The details are debated, but he may or may not have followed a couple home from a community meeting about the murders, in which a local man stood up and said something akin to, "No real man would let his wife be raped." And they were the next victims. Google Carol Daly and the Sacramento Bee. Richard Chase. Fun fact about me, always mix him up with Richard Ramirez, only entered homes with unlocked doors. He saw it as a sign and an invitation. Jerry Brudos was seemingly born with an innate abnormal foot fetish. I say abnormal, because loads of people like toes, but most of y'all don't go running out murdering people about it. He tried to steal his first grade teacher's shoes. He was from an abusive home, but still, that kind of specific thing that early? Interesting. Otis Toole is literally the caricature of how you would write the story, How to Raise a Serial Killer. Alcoholic parents, abandoned by his father, raised by his mother who dressed him in ladies' clothes and called him Susan, victim of abuse, sexual abuse, and incest. Like, I actually can't even type all the stuff about him that is so classic. Arson, head injuries. Also loads of interesting things about serial killers' accomplices, whether willing or not. I got a million of these. 10. Ted Bundy was almost caught by a couple, moments after one of his killings. It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story, since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward first date, and around the time that they would have said goodnight, the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place, since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area. So the two drove up the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars and started hiking under just the light of the stars, since it was a new moon. At some point, the male starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark, and because it was getting to be quite late. He ignores the feeling and presses on. In later rehearsings of the story, the female would say that she had felt the same feeling at what was probably the same time, though she didn't know the trail like he did. A minute later, the feeling came back to the male. He ignored it again, and started walking a bit of the way into the trees when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what this soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the female both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer, Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt the closest to being caught, he explained about the night that he lured a girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body and for some reason, just turn around and walk away. TLDR, friend's parents stumbled onto a fresh corpse left by Ted Bundy on their first date. 11. Here's one very few people talk about. This whole thread got me thinking. Joseph the Animal Barboza, September 20th, 1932, February 11th, 1976, was a Portuguese-American mafioso and notorious mob hitman for the Patriarca crime family during the 1960s. Here's some juicy bits. In his 1975 biography Barboza, written by true crime writer Hank Messick, he admitted to murdering at least 7 men, although he bragged to his friends that the total was closer to 29 because he wanted to be respected and feared nobody really knew the truth. He loved children and animals and was known to take neighborhood children to the park or zoo. He would often buy popcorn for children in the movie theater that did not have any, and his young daughter wanted for nothing. He was an amazing artist, citation needed, and would entertain neighborhood children with his sketches of Disney characters. A few notorious victims on his murder roster while involved with organized crime included Edward McLaughlin and both Cornelius Hughes and Stevie Hughes, who Barboza hunted down in a fit of rage after receiving news that his best friend Vincent Flemmi was badly wounded in a 1967 shootout with them. What do I learn from this whole topic? Serial killers are nice people until they get angry. This is disturbing, and now I'm gonna go grab a beer and contemplate life. 12. Randall Woodfield, known as the I-5 killer, operated on the Interstate 5 corridor in the Pacific Northwest during 1980 and part of 81. He's suspected of killing up to 44 people. Overall, he was just a terrible human being. But before he became the I-5 killer, Woodfield played wide receiver for the Portland State University Vikings football team for 2.5 years, but dropped out to be drafted by the Green Bay Packers in the 1974 NFL Draft. He got cut during training and played in some semi-pro teams instead. He was arrested for some flashing incidents and got cut completely from the NFL before 1974 was over. James Pietragallo and Jimmy Wisman do a great job of covering it in an episode of their crime and sports podcast. Cannot recommend it enough. 13. The Golden State Killer's dad was super abusive to the whole family, a surprise to no one. He divorced GSK's mother and left the country. Moved to South Korea and married another woman. And named the children. He had her the exact same names as the kids he had with his first wife. When GSK was attacking couples, he'd take the woman out into the living room and rape her. He often did it in front of the TV, which would be turned on with a towel or some sort of fabric covering the screen. This was so he could have just enough light to see her and what he was doing without having to actually turn the regular lights on. That would potentially get neighbors' attention. When officers raided his house after he was arrested in 2018, they found his computer screen with a towel hanging over it in the same fashion. 14. I am currently doing a minor for psychology, so eventually serial killers will come up eventually due to the high interest in the concept. Probably one of the most interesting things is, despite the various motives and styles, that is how they kill in their style. Majority of the time they tend to be very prideful. While there are a few exceptions, you will see some of the most infamous serial killers be quite boastful in regards of murdering. However, it is actually a bit more common than what you might think. Police even use this as a way to get people to confess, like the chessboard killer from Russia who confessed after the officer who was getting him to confess started to praise him about his work, and thus the killer starts to brag. In terms of a single interesting fact about an individual killer, Richard Chase, the vampire of Sacramento, who broke into homes, killed the occupants, and drank their blood, only broke into homes where the doors were unlocked, cause he took it as a sign of invitation, while locked ones meant you are unwelcomed. Definitely adds to the vampire nickname though. 15. The Black Dahlia killer was in police custody, as a suspect, and the LAPD let him walk because he was a practicing physician and part of the abortion ring that some of the LAP detectives were involved in. The son of the BDK wrote and published a book in 2003 of his realization and systematic research into the truth, all because he was briefly married to a woman whose photo he found in his father's effects after his father's death. The newer version includes transcripts from when the father killer was being interrogated/interviewed at the precinct that are damning. To sum up, the son of the Black Dahlia killer and the Black Dahlia killer were both married, even if briefly, to the same woman, and only his son finding a picture of his ex-wife in his father's things prompted more research into his father's past. There's a movie coming out about it soon, from the perspective of one of the BDK's other children, who was raped and violated and took him to court, but because the BDK was a part of that abortion ring, well, the killer hit the news because the first body to be found was that of a Massachusetts woman who was living in LA. There is a memorial stone here for the woman, whose name escapes me. 16. Some years ago we worked with the local police, and unfortunately it was around a horrific serial killers. After a few coffee breaks with the old dude cops, we did hear some interesting things. They insist these people are never especially intelligent, but like a lot of the long-term prisoners, they just dedicate a lot of time planning and plotting. A lot of them are really making very stupid low IQ moves, but it's just so incredibly bold that they got away with it. They compared it to a new house guest they'd finally caught who simply walked into a motorcycle shop in broad daylight, peak hours, said he needed one of the keys, in total view, actually was helped and drove off on a $20,000 motorcycle that was now his. He had also driven by the police numerous times and was not hiding it. It was so stupidly brazen that nobody thought it was suspicious. They say serial killers do this all the time. Not ingeniously, but just pure stupid brazen dumb luck that actually works for them. Contrary to the neighbor interviews. For some reason everyone says I'm just stunned. I mean, he seemed, I don't know, like a normal guy. For some natural psychological reason everyone says that, but further interviews and review of previous neighborhood complaints etc. will almost always reveal lots of people saw lots of really weird behavior, had problems with them, reported strange things, not murder things but like, 10 reports to bylaw he was repeatedly burning garbage in his backyard. Or complaints he was storing pop bottles full of gasoline on the fence. Contrary to nearly every serial killer movie or TV show of the last 30 years, they could not think of a single one who had scrawled Bible quotes on the wall, were evil Christians, were squealing on about how God did this or that. However, it seems that is common among the severely mentally ill or criminally insane folks who may very well murder people too, but rarely like a serial thing. They just go off on a rival homeless person or other kinds of things. The most disturbing thing I ever learned. As some older guards said, some of them are just perfectly normal. Like over 20 years they are just always very normal. Not jerks, not angels, not dumb or smart, average morals, totally every man, or in the case of the one I spent time with, an every woman. No traumatic past, no mental illness, no special troubles, not a sweetheart and not a nasty bitch, like pets. Didn't care for the latest Netflix sensation but liked that actor. What's his name? Stabbed someone's to death. She thought it would be fun to do her own podcast. Asks if the new Samsung is worth the price they're asking for it. Now that should disturb the hell out of all of us.
Thanks for watching. If you got this far, leave a comment, like if you liked it, and follow for more.